Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. My guest today is Dr. Shawn Stevens. He is FIRE's Chief Research Advisor. For those of you who don't know FIRE, it is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Shawn obtained his PhD in social psychology from Rutgers in 2013, and since then continued his work with Rutgers and also was the founder of Heterodox Academies. He was the first director of research, where he developed the Campus Expression Survey. 5 years later, he joined FIRE as its senior research fellow to run the college free speech rankings. For almost 2 decades, Shawn's research has focused on an understanding on how moral convictions produce motivated reasoning within the political domain, how this motivated reasoning can distort research in social sciences, and how motivated reasoning can lead to political intolerance and create obstacles to political compromise. Shawn joins me today to talk about free speech on campus and what higher ed leaders can do in today's political environment to ensure free speech stays in place. One note, whether you lean left or right, free speech is part of the First Amendment of our Constitution and is a critical element to the education of our younger generation. To that end, the Change Leader works with colleges and universities from all spectrums, and as such does not endorse any political leanings, and comments expressed by guests are theirs alone. As the saying goes, take what you want and leave the rest. Shawn, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
You're in the news a lot. You're part of the organization FIRE, which, some people will say, hey, I love it. Other people will say, oh, they're commie pinkos. Before we get to discussing those divergent points, tell us a little bit about you. You've got what I would say is a very interesting background for what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So my background is I have a doctorate in social psychology from Rutgers University in New Jersey. While there, I did a lot of political moral psychology research. I was always interested in the phenomenon of authoritarianism. So it's something that I've researched for a long time. And then, also became very familiar with John Haidt's moral foundations theory, which kind of comes back up in the story a little later. I then did a doctoral work at Rutgers, but it was joint with Rutgers and Stanford University. So I was at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences for about a year and a half as well. There, I continued working with my PhD advisor, Lee Jossum, but the professor at Stanford I worked with was John Krasnick, who has a very, very long, storied record in survey research and survey methodology. So I learned a lot about that then. And then I became the first research director of Heterodox Academy when John Haidt was the day-to-day executive director. So him and I worked very closely together for about 5 years, worked with him on revising his moral foundations questionnaire. So we have a new version that came out a few years ago. We tested it in 25 different countries across the world. So I think it's a pretty rigorous way of establishing a scale.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that work, I met Greg Lukianoff and some people at FIRE because Greg and John were writing Coddling the American Mind. At the time I was working at Heterodox Academy. And I kind of naturally gravitated towards FIRE, and they had this idea of the College Free Speech Rankings Project. And I was actually working on the questions with them. And then it kind of just made sense to go work at FIRE. So I asked if I could go work there, and they said yes. And here I am now, 6 years later, still there.
Wow. So your background really is a quantitative researcher.
Yeah, empirical social science, quantitative background, pretty strong in statistics for my field, I would say at least. I'm not a statistician by any means, but I do have some pretty good data analytic chops. Yeah.
Well, there's always that saying, liars, damn liars, and statisticians. So I'm glad you don't call yourself a statistician. So with that, and just as an aside, One of my dissertation mentors and a good friend of mine was a sociologist, and he taught me a lot about statistics.
Hmm.
It was incredibly important, especially for what you're doing,
Yeah.
is being able to dissect and break down different demographics as to your survey. So
Yeah.
kudos for learning that stuff. I learned it from my dissertation. That was about it.
Yeah. I think that's in a lot of social sciences. I think there's very interesting stuff that people do, and there's definitely some very math savvy people. But I think on the whole, the level of sophistication in those fields isn't, it's not as high as what a statistician would like to see necessarily.
Of course. So fire. Tell us about
Yeah.
fire. Just the name, kind of goes, whoa, what's this about?
Yeah. So founded in 1999 on the heels of a book that was written by two law professors, one a liberal, one a libertarian-ish kind of person. And so that's Harvey Silverglate and Charles Allen Coors. So they put out this book, The Shadow University, talking about the issues of free speech on campus in the 90s. And basically, they started getting like all these requests from students and faculty for legal advice and help. So they founded FIRE originally as the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. So for about 23 years, FIRE was essentially what I would say is like the old school ACLU, but strictly for students and faculty on college and
Hmm.
university campuses. And then in 2022, we expanded this mission to now, basically defend the speech rights of all Americans, not just students and faculty. And so we rebranded as the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We didn't want to lose the FIRE acronym, as you pointed out. It's pretty catchy. So there's some thought went into how to keep that. And then just in a nutshell, we're a nonpartisan organization, and our stance on the types of speech we defend is very simple. If it's protected by the First Amendment, we will defend it, no questions asked.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting. I do love the acronym FIRE, you know, because sometimes that's what happened is somebody needs to set something on fire to make change.
Yep.
But, you're not the only organization out there. Recently, AUP has started taking much more of a proactive stance against some of the things that are going on. And Penn America is similar as well.
Hmm.
What's the difference between you guys and Penn America?
So Penn America generally, I mean, they're a much older organization, founded,
Hmm.
I think, a little over 100 years ago. Their main mission is in like writing and literature and defending rights in that domain. So they do a lot of stuff with what like library censorship, book censorship of authors. So they kind of have like a broader mission in one sense, but then they kind of have this narrower focus when it comes to free speech. It's mainly for literature and literary figures.
Well, that makes sense. Although they've been getting into some of the stuff that's going on
They've
more.
started to, yeah, just
Yeah,
like the UP has as well, yeah.
exactly. So tell us about some of the things that fire does, because most people, they hear fire, they associate it with one thing, but your mission and what you do is far broader than most people think.
Yeah, so our narrow mission is we're a legal organization that will defend the speech rights of all Americans. But that's like a narrow mission. We want to develop like a culture of freedom of speech. And so we do a lot to that end. So while the majority of our employees are lawyers, we actually don't take on many cases. We found that it's more effective to kind of write letters, mainly like this is colleges and universities. We found it to be very effective to write kind of strongly worded letters to them, reminding them that they are, in violation of the First Amendment when they're sanctioning a student group or professor in some way. We've also found that, the court of public opinion can be pretty influential as well. So we have a dedicated communications department, and we have like our own Substack and a new, like on our site, there's a news section where we put out a lot of this information and try to influence things that way. And then our research department is fairly new. When I started at FIRE, there was no research department. I was kind of the only empirical researcher on staff. We now have a 10-person department. that's grown since 2020. We basically started the department, I think, in like 2021. It was like, okay, we're going to have an actual research department now, and kind of built out the infrastructure for that. And what we do at Fire is we do a lot of surveys, like public opinion surveys. Obviously, we'll talk about the college free speech rankings a little later. That's something we put out every year. But we survey the general public as well. We do quarterly surveys of Americans that we call the National Speech Index. And then we've also done a number of one-off surveys on things that are relevant to our work, like social media, content moderation, the role of AI in political advertising, Title IX cases, regulations, et cetera. We've surveyed the general public on all these things as well. Another thing that we do in terms of campus research is we track the outcomes of speech controversies. I'll leave it at that for now. We can get more into that later, but we have multiple databases that do that.
Sure. And that's one of the things I think you've brought to Fire is that research capability to where you do have multiple databases. And in our previous conversation, you talked about how you play off the general social survey and use things from that, which tell people, for those who may not know about the general social survey, just, 30 seconds on what that is.
Yeah. So in fields like psychology, political science, communication, sociology, the general social survey is widely used. It's a survey that runs every 2 years. There was like a span of time where it ran every year way back, but it basically runs every 2 years now. It's done out of the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. They have a battery of questions that they repeat every year, not every year, every iteration of the survey includes some set of questions that have been asked previously and been asked going back to 1972. So what this affords researchers is the ability to track trends over time.
Sure.
Cross-sectional trends, right? This wouldn't be longitudinal research. It's not the same people taking the survey every time, but we could still track trends. And what else the general social survey does is outside of that core set of questions, they have other questions that they put in that are relevant basically to what's happened recently. And that's how we modeled our college free speech ranking survey, like me having awareness of the general social survey and how researchers basically will download the data set and can basically write up a paper in almost like a week or two and then send it off for publication. Having that kind of data and making it accessible to people is a very valuable resource. So part of what's gone into the thinking of our ranking survey is we have a core set of 20 questions that we ask every year. That's what we use to calculate the student perception aspect of the overall score. But then we have space for another 10 to 15 questions usually that it's, whatever seems interesting, whatever's relevant. We're definitely going to have something about Charlie Kirk next year, I imagine, on there,
no doubt.
or at least reactions to that incident. In years past, we asked things about October 7th. We've asked things about George Floyd, things like that.
Sure.
But that's kind of it. It's designed to both be, tool for activism and advocacy and enacting change at universities, but we also see it as a very valuable tool for social science researchers.
It is. In fact, I used it on my dissertation years ago. I did my dissertation probably around the same time you were going through, your teenage years. And we'll just put a little.
And now I'm talking to student reporters that it's like I've been out of college longer than they've been alive. So
I know it's crazy. People ask me about, well, how did you get this white hair? I said, I've been in education a long time. That ought to explain it. So Fire in itself tracks broader trends.
Yeah.
So it's not just specific event perspectives, although you come out with your opinions on that. But what are some of the trends that you look at and have looked at in the past?
Yeah. So through both our survey data and the databases we maintain, we can get a sense of kind of, with the survey data, it's what are, some of the trends we've tracked is like, where's political tolerance among college undergraduates going? Is it increasing, decreasing? Unfortunately, it's decreasing, it seems like.
Across all society.
Yeah, across all society. And then, with our databases, like you said, we can highlight an individual case and, come up with an opinion on that. But the ability they afford us is we can comment on broader trends about campus censorship. Are these attempts increasing over time? They are, unfortunately. But yeah, and kind of what that can allow us to do is, we've dug deep into the McCarthy era, because that is the historical era that, I think sticks out to most Americans as this is when speech was clearly being threatened by the government. It was clearly being threatened on colleges and university campuses. Communist professors and those sympathetic with communism were being denied tenure, being fired, being denied jobs. And it's a terrible time period in our history, but from what we've been able to unearth is that somewhere between 100 and 150 professors were fired during this time period. And it's a lot, and it's not good. But I'm bringing that up because what we've seen over the past decade, and the McCarthy era was basically about a 9-10 year span, but we've seen far more than that.
Wow, really?
We've seen more than that. And, basically in the past few weeks, we've recorded 12 faculty terminations. All of these are in response to comments made on social media about the Charlie Kirk assassination. And all of them came after, I wouldn't even call them veiled threats. They came after the colleges and universities were threatened by government actors. Basically like, hey, your funding's up. You sure you want to employ this person? It's not really a veiled threat. It's a clear threat of what they intend to do.
That's actually happening?
That is happening now as we speak, yeah. I mean, maybe not right now as we speak, but it's been happening over the last few weeks, yes.
Because I know there are far-reaching implications to the Charlie Kirk assassination,
Yeah.
just as there were to October 7th protests, pro-Palestine, etc. Before we get into those, I'd like to get into your most recent survey that you've done, Scholars Under Fire.
Yeah, so that's a survey of faculty members that are listed in the mentioned Scholars Under Fire database. This is something we maintain that tracks attempts made to sanction, we call it scholars because it's primarily faculty. I would say probably 95, maybe even 98% of the people listed are faculty members, but it also includes postdoctoral researchers, research fellows, and PhD students. Effectively, it's anyone who's like teaching, researching, or doing both at a university, we would count as a scholar. So they go in the database when they get targeted by, it could be students, it could be their colleagues, it could be other faculty, it could be the administration, it could be members of the local community, it could be politicians, as I've mentioned. But what we do is we kind of track and document what these attempts look like. And so this survey that we did was we sent basically an email invite to the 600 or so entries at the time that we had recorded from 2020 through 2024, whenever we launched the survey. We got about a little over 200 responses. So that's pretty good. That's a very good response rate considering the pool was like the pool was about 600 people and we got about a third of them responding. I think that's a pretty good. Yeah, that's good.
Especially with such a controversial topic right now and the potential implications for becoming known to responding and doing something with this.
Yeah. And so some of the main findings that we found here are these sanction attempts they have a lot of ramifications, and it's not just on the individual faculty member themselves even. They have a lot of downstream and like longer term consequences. Most faculty that we surveyed reported having negative experiences like loss of sleep, loss of friends, PTSD-like symptoms. Some lost their jobs. This had then downstream effects on family members and friends. But what was really interesting in the data, almost every single one of them, of the faculty members, said they would do exactly what they did again, despite these consequences. The majority of them were like, I would do it exactly the same again. Little bit differences there with ideology where the conservative, more conservative leaning professors were very adamant that they would not change a thing about what they said. More liberal leaning professors, it was more of a, well, maybe I would. And I look at that as that's, the makeup of the professor. It is going to skew liberal. And so the liberal professors are more like, wait, I don't want to necessarily get kicked out of the club. So maybe I would think about this and not do it exactly the same. Whereas the conservative faculty were like, well, I've already been kicked out of the club, so why would I change anything, right? So that was a really interesting finding, considering that they all also reported all these negative consequences that they experienced. But another thing that stuck out to us, and I think is really relevant, and is a main theme in the report we released, is faculty members felt that they could not count on and they did not receive a lot of support from their institution. So from the administrators at their institution, from their colleagues at the institution, from their union, even like the union they were a part of, they reported receiving very little help from these sources publicly. Privately, their colleagues would tell them that they sympathize with them, but they can't say so in public. They can't stand up for them. And that to me, and then that this is the theme in our report, it's like faculty need to stick together and defend each other and not turn on each other in these situations. And I think what we've already talked about a little bit, and the aftermath of this assassination with all these calls to sanction and fire faculty, like this is needed more than ever now. Like they need to stick together. The unions who are supposed to protect them should be doing that.
Mm-hmm. But isn't there a bright line between inflammatory remarks and remarks that don't cross that? Like, for instance, if someone were to say, well, I'm really happy that so-and-so was assassinated or whatever, he deserved it, versus it was not right that this happened. I don't agree with it, but I do agree with, certain things that, are said against it.
There is a line. There certainly is a line between, there's a line you can cross where the speech is no longer protected, for sure. I think
I'm going to interrupt you there. The protected speech, where does, I agree. There's got to be protected speech and stuff that goes across the line, hate, threats, et cetera, who draws that line?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to get at is we've largely drawn that line through court cases, right? We don't want our politicians choosing where this line is. We don't want our elected officials doing that. We've adjudicated this largely through the courts. What fits in that bucket of unprotected speech is probably a lot smaller than what most Americans think. Both of those comments that you said, in variation on the assassination would be protected. Probably maybe should choose your audience a little bit better if you're going to be celebrating it, right? I would maybe recommend not putting that on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, or whatever other social media channels you might put it on, and maybe, talk to your close family and friends about it because they're not going to like stab you in the back over the comment. All of these comments that these professors were fired over were protected speech, even if some of them effectively did celebrate the assassination. Yeah, that's like, I'm kind of saying, it's like, well, these are very smart people. I really wish they maybe just resisted the urge to put that out on social media.
Exactly. What comes to mind for me is the movie The American President with Michael Douglas, when you've got somebody just railing, his girlfriend, and, it's like, it's none of your business, but it's out there anyway. Mm-hmm. And as much as you may hate what that other person is saying, he or she still has the right to say it.
Yep. Yeah, and in the case of these professors, the university, there are cases where the university might be able to actually fire a professor for comments, right? If they were essentially acting as a spokesperson for the university and said something like that's very inflammatory, the school could be like, yeah, no, like you're gone. But every single one of these professors did this on their personal X account or Facebook account or Twitter account. Like, okay, so it lists that they work at the university. It might not even list that, but this is just public comments made by a citizen. They're not speaking for the university, so these are not fireable offenses.
They shouldn't be.
Yeah, they shouldn't be.
They shouldn't be, but yeah, they are. And, it also depends too on where you are, public versus private university. Yep. And unfortunately, it also depends on, what color state you're in.
Yeah. A lot of these are happening in more conservative states, and it's conservative, Republican lawmakers, either at the state or federal level, targeting these professors and making these threats about funding, et cetera. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's where when we were talking the other day, the government interventions come into play. The threatening of funding. If you don't do something about this person or this speech, then we're going to pull your thing. Is that legal?
It shouldn't be. I don't think, as a non-lawyer, I will say, I don't think it is. I'm sure, though, the attorneys I work with will tell me there might be some exceptions to that, right? Like kind of what I just adjudicated about like if I'm acting as a spokesperson for the university, it's a little bit different than if I'm commenting on my personal Facebook account. So I would imagine I will be told that there's probably some exceptions to that, but for the most part, no, it's not legal.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought as well. But, sometimes it's really hard in the face of, and I go back to one of my church ministers. He said, it's not hard to do the right thing when there's no threat against you personally.
Yep.
But when
Yeah.
there is, that's where it becomes far harder because you're going to have to deal with implications. And I think
Hmm.
that's why a lot of people may be sitting on the sidelines with all the things that are going on.
Yeah. And this is why, I mean, yes, if you go through our databases, there's some odious characters in there, I'd say, basically, right? Something for everybody that you could find. And yeah, that's pretty bad that the person said that, and it's pretty offensive. It's still protected. But then there's also plenty of people in those databases where it's like, wait, this person got punished for that? Seems a little
Yeah.
odd. But I'm bringing this up because in relation to what you said, I mean, this is why the First Amendment exists we have to defend the speech we hate because it's easy to defend the speech that nobody finds offensive or harmless. It's the controversial, offensive, hateful speech that requires defending. So that's why we kind of do what we do. And that's why there's plenty of odious characters in those databases.
Sure. And I'm sure I'm in there for something that I said probably 30 years ago. So please expunge your database for me if you would. No, just kidding. You guys did your survey rankings on September 9th, and then on the
Yep.
10th was the abominable assassination of
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk. Tell us about that. What do you think is going to be the aftermath? Because you've done survey data. Tell me more.
Yeah. So our survey was done in the spring. We run it every spring, and then we release the rankings in the fall, like you said. So yeah, we put them out on Tuesday, September 9th. We did a webinar for our donors and our faculty network that we then just opened to the public too on September 10th at noon. And that ended at 1. And then I was doing something similar around 2 p.m. I was recording a podcast interview to be aired the next week and was being literally asked about. We have a question that asks about the acceptability of using violence to stop a speech. So I was being asked about that question when a colleague sent me a chat through Google that Charlie Kirk had just been shot.
Mm.
So I had to get that quick question repeated to me because I only got half of it. And, then we kind of talked a little bit about breaking news and where things might go. And I think we're already seeing things that we thought would happen are already starting to happen. Just since you and I spoke last, we've seen multiple speaking events canceled due to as I think I hinted at, I was like, they're going to start doing this because they'll say that they cannot provide adequate security at the event.
Sure.
And that is happening. Ilya Shapiro just had a talk. Well, I think NYU will say they didn't cancel it, that they simply wanted the date changed and the venue changed. But Ilya Shapiro was he's a law professor, was scheduled to give a talk on October 7th at NYU.
Mm-hmm.
Ilya Shapiro is staunchly pro-Israel. And so the student group organizing it was asked first to see if Professor Shapiro can appear on a different date. And also, can we do it in a smaller, more secluded venue that's not, so high profile? They agreed, sounded like they agreed to the venue change, but Professor Shapiro was not able to attend on a different date, and they didn't want to move the date. They thought having him give the speech, the date was picked for a reason, clearly, and they want him speaking on that date. So this event is not going on. There's been a few others. don't have all the details on them yet, so I don't necessarily want to say that it would be like the university kind of canceled this talk or that talk. Some of the details are still coming in,
Yeah.
but we're already starting to see this, which is something we said we would be concerned about in the
Mhm.
immediate aftermath, because we have to keep people safe is generally a convincing argument for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. But at the same time, I just read something online that there was one of the very pro-conservative speakers who came to one of the college campuses, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was and where it was, but it went off without a hitch. And instead of people getting up and shouting, it was a dialogue
Yeah,
back and forth.
I think you are talking about Michael Knowles, who appeared, I believe it was the University of Minnesota. And
I
so
think you're
what,
right. Yes.
yeah, and so he's one person who's doing this, and other conservative commentators are doing this as well. Charlie Kirk had a whole tour planned with scheduled
Yes.
stops at something like a dozen
Hmm.
universities. So other conservative commentators have said, we will do these appearances so that effectively the show still goes on. So Michael Knowles has done one, Megyn Kelly has done one. I believe Ben Shapiro is scheduled to do one at some point. I know Glenn Beck is scheduled to do one. But yes, the Knowles event, I think, that's what you want to see, right? He took over the mantle. He came to campus. The event went off seamlessly. Students engaged with him. He basically did like what Charlie Kirk had done. He sits there and takes questions and then just engaged with them. And I think
Hmm.
that was a very positive event. It's nice to see that. I'll admit I've been monitoring each of these because the schedule's out. And so
Hmm.
it's like, okay, so this one's up, this one's happening today. Like, is anything going on? It's like you can check out if there's anything kind of going on in the lead up. And we haven't seen that really yet. So I think that's a good thing.
I think so as well. So, what can colleges do to help people express themselves today in today's climate? Obviously it's digressed so much to where instead of talking with someone, we see it in Congress especially,
Hmm.
instead of talking with people, helping to understand that old adage, you don't understand me until you've walked a mile in my shoes.
Hmm.
How can we get people to have civil discourse instead of shouting past each other or, God forbid, digressing into violence?
Yeah. So we need strong leadership from like presidents, provosts, the top administrators at these colleges and universities. They have an ability to really set the tone. A common thread that runs through the schools that perform consistently well in our rankings year over year, and I'll say perform consistently well, the analogy I'll use is it's like the top 25 in college football. You're not going to be number one every year, but
Sure.
if you're in the top 25 like every year, you're probably doing something better than everybody else out there.
That's one
Um,
heck of a program.
Yeah, basically, even if, and I know it's like, oh, the highest grade was like a B minus, they're pretty harsh on everybody. I'm saying that those schools at the top still are doing better and should be looked at as kind of the models, even if they have room to improve. So the common thread there is all those places have had strong administrative leadership who have very clear stances on freedom of speech in that they
Mhm.
support it and they will protect it. And while their records may not be perfect, when controversies arise, they typically do protect speech and resolve it in a way that we think is positive. The flip side and the contrast is the schools at the bottom, it's kind of the opposite. It's weaker leadership, or not, I don't know if weaker is the right word, but just inconsistent.
Okay.
Inconsistently applying policies, oh, well, this speech we're going to censor, but this one over here we're not. Technically could be censored under the policy you use to censor the one over here. And so we see a lot of inconsistent application at these schools. At a lot of them, there's more controversies. And I don't know if that's due to how they've resolved the ones in the past or not. But as a parent and, a dog owner for decades, it's, when you don't punish bad behavior or you reward bad behavior, even like, well, that's a surefire way to get them to repeat it.
hmm So there needs to be, what I'm hearing you say is there needs to be better guidelines of where that bright line is that you
Yep.
don't exceed. You need
Yeah.
to be defending free speech on those side that is, quote, the protected speech. What about
Yep.
civic education? What about
Yep.
teaching people to have, you know, I don't want to say nice discourse, but decent discussions to
Yeah.
where you can learn somebody else's point?
You beat me to the punch there. What we've seen at a handful of schools, we've seen what we would call civic dialogue or civic discourse programs enacted. They're called something different at every school. I'm guessing there's like copyright stuff there, right? So it's like Dialogue Vanderbilt is the one at Vanderbilt. And I think it's
Mhm.
Open Dialogue program at Dartmouth. And Harvard has launched an intellectual diversity one. I'll highlight Vanderbilt and Dartmouth in particular because their programs have, Vanderbilt in particular has been around now. It's going into its third year, I think. But what we saw, and again, this is correlational. We're not running an experiment with in tandem with them. Our survey is just in the field, and we kind of know that this thing started. And we have one question on the survey where we ask students, paraphrasing the prompt, but it's effectively, here's a list of topics that people say are difficult to discuss. Which ones do you find difficult to discuss on campus, right? And it's a checklist, and they can just check as many as they want, or they can say none of the above. And what we saw at Vanderbilt was after the first year of them starting this program, we saw significant improvements. And by significant, I mean the percentage shift in terms of students saying they could discuss this was like at least 7-8%, if not more.
Okay.
In most cases, it was a lot higher. Improvement on every single topic with the exception of one. And the one topic that there wasn't significant improvement on was Israel Palestine. So I think that makes sense in 2024.
Of course. Of
And then
course.
this year, what we saw is we didn't see improvement on every issue again. I mean, some of these issues at Vanderbilt are now basically at the ceiling of students saying, like, yeah, we feel comfortable talking about that. So there's not much more room to improve. But we still saw improvement on like something like 6 to 8 of the topics. And this year, there was improvement on Israel Palestine, as students saying
Wow.
that they were able
Good.
to. It's still a minority of students saying that they feel like they can discuss it, but there was an improvement. And so I think that's, again, it's correlational, but through that and then other kind of anecdotal observations of Vanderbilt students saying this program's great, it's really helped me, it's helped me talk, like be able to talk to people across divides, I think it's having an impact. Dartmouth started one last year, so we're kind of expecting to see more of the gains in next year's data set, basically, because
Mhm.
these things, it takes time for these things to kind of get in and have an impact on student perceptions and attitudes. But there's a lot schools can do with that, and in my conversations with student journalists, I get the impression that the students want this. There's a lot of students that want this and are craving it. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like there's a demand and you're going to meet the demand. And I think it'll be a very positive thing if schools do that.
Yeah. The other piece that I would say is really important, and I'm going to bring in a little bit of a controversial aspect with this. Not that you're afraid to talk about controversy, I know that. But there is the, I don't want to say perception, it's more of a talking point that colleges are brainstorming students to be leftist, woke, et
Hmm.
cetera, et cetera. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant. But really, what to me I think is relevant was when you go to what is the purpose of higher education? It's
Hmm.
not only to prepare people for a career through skills, but it's also to help them transform from being teenagers to adults, et cetera, and to be able to make up their own mind with respect to what they think is
Hmm.
important and relevant. The only way you can do that is through exposure to multiple
Yep.
different perspectives. Do you agree with that?
Yep. Oh, I agree for sure. I think that there's interesting and just interject an interesting data point
Yeah.
on that. Faculty at a lot of law schools skew more liberal. And
Hmm.
so there's been some studies that show like conservative law students are better able to anticipate arguments made by liberal judges than liberal students are. able to anticipate legal arguments made by conservatives because they're exposed to the liberal ones.
Sure.
And they know the conservative ones because they're conservative, whereas some of the liberal students are not getting that exposure. And so then it like surprises them when a legal decision comes down in a way that it comes down. And it's like, look at the makeup of, the court ruling this. It's like 3-2 Republican, and that's how they've ruled. And the conservative students aren't surprised by that. So I think that's a good data point to go with what you're saying, basically. Yeah. It's like, you need this exposure.
So you need civic education. What colleges can do, civic education, change in policies to make sure that there is a good bright line, protecting those who don't cross the bright line, and exposure. Anything else?
I think we, in some ways, and I don't know how, I think this maybe comes more bottom up from faculty and et cetera, but I think in some ways it feels like we've gotten away from like curiosity in exploring things and kind of getting more at, oh no, we know the truth, and like, this is it.
Yeah, because we read it on Facebook, right?
Yeah, so we need to get more back into the Socratic. I love Socrates as a philosopher, largely because his comment about wisdom is like, the best piece of wisdom I can give you is like, I know nothing. I don't know anything for sure. I think we need to get back to that mindset a little bit. A pet peeve of mine is hearing the term settled science. There's no such thing. It's never settled. Good. Even if we think something is true and we have a quote law about it, we could still test it, see if it holds up. And maybe it doesn't fully hold up, or maybe it plays out differently in certain settings. But yeah, that's a more difficult thing to enact, I think, because it's not like, hey, we can start a program about curiosity like we did about like civic dialogue. Like, I think it's a little bit different. It's changing the mindset and trying to get out of feeling so certain about things. But I think that's very important to all of this.
It is. And I think that concept of curiosity is so important because going back to the purpose of college, yes, career, etc., but helping someone transform from being a teen to an adult to being a civic-minded human being requires that exposure, requires that curiosity. And I can tell you that my opinions from 5 minutes ago, no, I'm just kidding, from 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I got out of the Navy to where they are now, it's night and day. And if I had not been exposed, if I didn't have a curiosity about other things, none of it would happen.
Yeah, no, I agree. This gets back into free expression in a sense, because being intellectually curious, you will explore controversial ideas, dangerous ideas, maybe. And so it kind of feeds back into that as well in terms of, hey, it's like, you know what? Like, just because the person's reading Mein Kampf, it doesn't make them a Nazi. Maybe they're trying to understand the Nazi mindset.
Yeah.
And that's probably a pretty good book to read to understand it, I would imagine.
I would say you're probably right. There's also a lot of stuff. We could, at this point, explore book burning. We could explore banning of books, all those sort of things. We don't have time to do that. We'll do that on another episode for sure. Sean, this has been fabulous. I really appreciate your taking the time. As we always do, final 2 questions. What are the 3 takeaways university presidents and boards need to think about right now to protect free speech and their people? I mean, we're potentially in dangerous times right now.
Yeah. So 3 main takeaways are, you need to start a lot of the schools don't do well because in our mind, they're not even doing the bare minimum policy wise, which is setting those bright lines. So this probably goes under that rubric of strong leadership, but you need to lead. You need to lead your university. You need to set the example for your students.
And this isn't only presidents, this is boards too.
Yeah. And this is presidents, this is provosts, this is deans. These are people in the leadership positions at the universities. Like, you get to set the tone and the students will respond.
Yes.
So I think that's critical. And then once you've done this, once you've got the bright lines established, and controversy is going to happen. It's not going to go away. University of Chicago, we praise them all the time. They have a green light speech code. They have good speech policies. They've adopted the stance of institutional neutrality. They authored the Chicago Statement, so clearly they've adopted that we encourage schools to do. But it's not like they don't have controversy. They've had shoutdowns. They've had students attempt to disrupt events. So when those things inevitably do happen, because they will, you've got to stick by your principles and show that leadership to the students and explain it to them. Don't do things in the dark. Do things out in the open. I'll go to an example of this and try to keep it brief because it's like shocking. But at Indiana last spring in 2024, when the administration got wind of students planning to set up an encampment protest in a historic location on campus that 40 years prior had basically had the same thing happen to protest South African apartheid, and the school celebrates this. They held an 11th hour meeting, literally 11th hour. It was like at 11 p.m. at night to change the policies, and they banned the erection of structures on campus, and then they considered the tents structures. They called the state police in to break up this protest, and the infinite wisdom of the state police was they thought it was a real good idea to put snipers on the roof of a building there.
Oh.
Not a good response.
No.
Not a good response at all. And the students have punished Indiana for this in the rankings accordingly. Their administrative score is quite low. And a number of student comments centered on this event. Wow. Basically, we asked students, like, tell us about a time, basically, that you self-censored. And I remember one comment in particular sticks out. It's like, well, the president called snipers on us. That was the comment.
Oh, so, my God.
What do you think? Kind of.
Yeah. And that's a typical state police response. You can understand that.
Yeah, not a good look on a college campus. Definitely seen as excessive. And so you've got to stand by your principles when controversy arises. It can be difficult sometimes. You might be getting pressure from alumni. You might be getting pressure from student organizations. You might be getting pressure from faculty. More recently, we're seeing you're probably going to get some pressure from politicians.
And your board who are been influenced by the politicians.
Yeah, of course. So this might be difficult, but I think if you stand up for your students, your faculty, and your college or university, you'll be rewarded. I actually will praise, even though they famously don't do very well in our rankings, I will give praise to President Garber at Harvard for how he's handled the past year and not bending the knee to the Trump administration the way some of their Ivy League peers have.
Right.
Third point I would say is, I think it's go back to promoting civic discourse, promote it.
Yeah.
Like create opportunities for students to have these experiences and engage in dialogue and learn why freedom of speech is so important in this country, why we defend it, why we need it. And I think it's coming out now, like we need it maybe more than ever on college and university campuses with the way our government is acting towards them.
Well, there is a reason why the first article, the Bill of Rights, Article 1 of the Constitution, has to do with freedom of speech, religion, the press.
Yeah.
All things that are critical. And if you stop and think about it, what happened with Jimmy Kimmel? Jimmy Kimmel got yanked off the air. There was such a public outcry about this, and it hit Disney very badly in the pocket because people were upset. Disney owns ABC.
Yeah.
He's back on, and he's also back on Sinclair and the other network who had said, no, we're not going to do this.
And it's a good example of why censorship often fails and backfires, because his ratings are through the roof now compared to where they were a few weeks ago.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, this has been great. What's next for you, Sean?
So next for us is we have a survey in the field right now, surveying college undergraduates. We're repeating a handful of questions from the ranking survey, but then there's another set of questions on there that focus more on the assassination and kind of recent events that have occurred. So we're taking the pulse of students in that way. That is also going to include an oversample of students at Utah Valley University, where the assassination occurred. Like I mentioned earlier, we run a quarterly national speech index. So that runs every 3 months. So our next one for that will come out in January. We're literally running one right now at the end of October. And so we'll put the results of that out in November, and then we'll run that again in January. I'm very interested to see that, because as part of that project, similar to our ranking survey, we have 5 questions that we ask every time. One of them is literally a free speech tracker. So along the lines of, are you happy with the direction of the country? Yes or no? It's basically, what do you think of the state of free speech, like good or bad? And so I'm actually very interested to see what those numbers look like now. They've been pretty stagnant over time, not much fluctuation overall. Prior to the election, Democrats thought things were going well and Republicans didn't. That clearly switched after last year's election. But overall, the line has kind of stayed roughly like where it's been, like 35 to 40% say they're happy with the direction of speech in the country. I'm just very interested in seeing what that number is going to be this time in the aftermath of the events of this past month.
I am fascinated as well. Let's have you back on the show to talk about it.
I'd love to. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much. It has been a great conversation. Appreciate you, appreciate your time and all you're doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to my guest, Dr. Shawn Stevens from the Foundation of Individual Rights and Expression. Shawn, it was a pleasure having you on the show. I look forward to the next time we get a chance to exchange ideas. To my listeners, thanks again for tuning in. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.